Welcome. You're listening to Sons and Kings, the Psalm 2 show where we unlock the church's ancient battle cry of divine filiation and embrace the gentle kingship of Christ through the riches of the Christian tradition. Happy Tuesday. Let's begin. Welcome back to another episode of Sons and Kings, the Psalm 2 show. We're here as always with Pat and Lewis.
Hey, Jake.
Good day.
Good day to you, sir. Can you give us one more time, Pat, verse 7 here?
I will announce his decree. The Lord has said to me, you are my son. This day have I begotten you.
Awesome. So last time we were talking about kind of historical aspect to this. What would a Jew of this time have thought about this? But now we want to dive a little bit more into the today. Like, what does it mean by today here in this verse?
Yeah, it's kind of puzzling. In the historical context, I guess on the day of your coronation, you receive this adoption by God that the king of Israel would have received. But I think there are lots of ways to take this, especially in reference to Jesus. What would it mean that Jesus, has he been begotten? Saint Bellarmine, in his commentary on the Psalms, picks out three, I think, of many possible interpretations of this, but we'll start with these three. He says, 3 generations are here alluded to. The first, when in the day of eternity, I, God, begot you, God. That example is referring to the generation of God the Son from God the Father before all time, eternally. Straightforward and clear, right? The second, when on the day of your birth, that is Jesus' birth, I begot thee according to the flesh, made you God-man, without the seed of man, your mother remaining inviolate, without the stain of sin. So this is referring to the conception of Jesus within the womb of Mary, that on that day, that makes sense very clearly, God the Father begets Jesus on that day, on the day that he becomes incarnate. And then thirdly, I begot you today, that is on the day of your resurrection, when by my divine power I restored you to life, and that a glorious and immortal one. So there's 3 possibilities here. One is the eternal begetting of God the Son by God the Father. Second, that on the moment of his conception, he was begotten, Jesus' conception as a human being, he was begotten. And then thirdly, on the day of resurrection, that also is a time of Jesus' being begotten. So those are kind of some useful starting points for understanding what it means today. What day is that referring to? Those are some of the possibilities.
Yeah, I think it's so beautiful to just meditate on the reality that God the Father and God the Son, that eternal relationship had no beginning. Like, it's eternal. Like, sometimes we think of it as like it started and then it kept going. But actually, no, it's the foundation of all reality is that love. God is love. Like, that is so, I mean, it's one of those things where just like the Trinity, you meditate on that, you're just like overcome by how amazing that is, that the foundation of all being is this filial relationship, if you will, this relationship between Father, Son, obviously, and Holy Spirit. But that first eternal today is like, that's our destiny, right? The beatific vision. Like, that is like, that eternal today is obviously Christ from all eternity, but for us also to be able to behold the face of God in this time beyond all time, if you will. So it's one of those things that I think we can't take for granted. We say things like the creed, where, we're reading the Gospels and we come across these things, like the first chapter of John, the Gospel of John, and we read, oh yeah, God from God, life from life, oh wow, forever, yeah. And we're just like glossing over, like, no, this is like, this awe is needed. We need the awe at that, because it helps to inspire us to keep going and have that spiritual fervor in our hearts for what we're called to, that eternity. When we kind of meditate on this reality, like, no, this eternal love, that's what we're called to know. That's what we're called to. That's the foundation of our faith. The first, as Bellarmine talks about, generation that we can think of as we think about this verse of the Psalm.
Yeah, and I think it's Benedict XVI in his meditation during the Christmas Eve Mass that we referenced in our last episode. He relates these first two, that God's eternally being begotten, that God the Son's eternally being begotten by God the Father, this kind of eternal relationship, which somehow before all time and forever, they were always in this relationship. That
distinct only in those relationships.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, C.S. Lewis says that it's like 2 books stacked on top of each other. That you might think that, oh, that means that someone had to come and put one on top of the other. But in fact, it's more like they were always in this relationship. For us who live in a world of time, you think that someone has to come along and put it on top of each other. But in reality, those were always in relationship in that way.
Yeah,
and that's kind of the way to think about it. Benedict XVI says that God's everlasting today has come down into the fleeting today of the world and has lifted our momentary today into God's eternal today.
Mm.
Okay, so I just said today a lot, but I guess what he's
That's what
trying
we're
to
talking about
say
this time.
exactly, very topical. But that kind of that the eternally being begotten of God, of Jesus, of God the Son, I should say, kind of crashes into human reality at the moment of the incarnation, and then our being in time is lifted up in that moment into the mystery of the eternal present that is the today of the begetting within the Trinity. So I think that that's a really powerful way to think about the incarnation is it's the moment in which that eternal present of the Trinity comes crashing into human history
Mm.
and pulls history back with itself into the mystery of the Trinity.
Yeah, I mean, in that second, right, the incarnation, if you will, right. What I love about that is that with the first begotten, Christ begotten eternally from that had no beginning, no end. The second had a beginning, but no end. I love how in the Second Vatican Council it says that in his incarnation, Christ in some way united himself to all of mankind. I just love that. I love that sense of like Christ united himself in that moment of the incarnation. It wasn't like, oh, let me just get this done real quick, incarnation, and I'm gone. No, like this is like a permanent, like he has committed himself through the incarnation to humanity, really taking on a human nature.
Mhm.
Like that is a real reality, permanent reality. And it almost seems like this is why it's a stumbling block for so many folks who are not Christian, because they're like, you're saying God united himself forever to human nature? Just this lowly material stuff? Like you got, yes, absolutely. Like that is the radical nature. And again, just like with the first, we cannot like just look at that and be like, oh, that's cool. The incarnation. Like this is major. Like this is a huge thing that God has done. Like in this today of like the incarnation, he really is committing himself in a permanent unity with humanity out of love. Right. And so it's like, I love you say like, this is the Trinity breaking into humanity, breaking into our time and like coming into time and uniting itself. And I love that, just reflecting on that.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that it's amazing that this verse is the two pivotal moments in salvation history and in the course of the liturgical year, that is Christmas and Easter. We haven't yet talked about the third option, which is that this is referring to the resurrection. But in fact, this is how Paul interprets it in Acts 13, verse 33. He says, we would tell you the good news. What God promised our ancestors, he has fulfilled for us, their children, by raising up Jesus. As it is written in the second psalm, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. God raised him from the dead so that he will never be subject to decay.
Mm.
Paul sees that sonship as being fulfilled in the moment of resurrection. That moment of resurrection is the moment of reconciliation between humanity and divinity, that man in the resurrection becomes reunited with God as a fulfillment of the incarnation, which began at Christmas. Well, the reunion of God and man occurs and is pleaded by the resurrection. So, I mean, there's a reason that this psalm became the subject of our podcast, and St. Josemaria recommended that we read it every week. And that's because the church fathers and Paul, they all saw this verse as being a central view into the mystery of the Trinity, and also how in the incarnation and resurrection of Jesus, we as human beings participate in that Trinity. So it's amazing how it's all packed together, and it culminates in this one verse in verse 7.
Yeah, exactly, Pat. It's really cool, kind of building off this one idea from last episode that the king is a representation of the people, and the people get to participate in the relationship of the king with God. And then here too, like for us, in the misery of our today, in the sorrow of our today, in the failure of our today, that God says to us too, like, my son, today I have begotten you. What an awesome place for prayer that is bursting through again, once again, in the eternal present, just like Jesus on the cross. We can unite to that, like bursting through. It's such a encouraging, amazing reality to meditate on. So we'll be continuing to kind of pull this apart, look at this from different angles in the next couple of weeks here on Sons and Kings.
Why this tumult among nations, among peoples this useless murmuring? They arise, the kings of the earth. Princes plot against the Lord and his anointed. Come, Let us break their fetters. Come, let us cast off their yoke. He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord is laughing them to scorn. Then he will speak in his anger. His rage will strike them with terror. It is I who have set up my king on Zion, my holy mountain. I will announce the decree of the Lord said to me, you are my son. It is I who have begotten you this day. Ask, and I shall bequeath to you the nations. Put the ends of the earth in your possession. With a rod of iron you will break them, shatter them like a potter's jar. Now, O kings, understand. Take warning, rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with awe and trembling. Pay him your homage, lest he be angry and you perish. For suddenly his anger will blaze. Blessed are they who put their trust in God.
Hey, this is Jake. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Sons and Kings, the Psalm 2 show. We're really glad that you joined us today. We hope you got something out of it. And if you did, I'd love to invite you to share it with a friend or even just like or subscribe to the platform. It really helps us to get the message out to more people, help more people with the show. Thank you again, and we'll see you in the next episode.